Now, if you look on your scale, 1 inch is actually pretty big, right? Half an inch is a lot smaller, so it's nice that we have that smaller division on here. But the fact is, half of an inch is not a very small measurement either. In fact, we need to get even smaller. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to our giant inch. We're going to take our giant inch and I'm going to fold it like it was. So it was folded in half. And then what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to fold it in half again. Okay, and then we will put it up and take a look. And what you're going to see is now we have a couple of more creases, right? So let's go in there and let's add 2 more dark, long lines. Just as dark and just as long as all the lines we've made so far. Okay, and if we had to come up with the fraction represented by this amount from here to here, if this is a half, most people understand that half of a half is 1/4. Right? So the space between 0 and the first mark here is 1/4. Now 1/2 is 2/4, isn't it? Look, it's the same amount of space from here to here and from here to here. Now we don't say 2/4 because what we do with fractions is we reduce them when we can, but the reality is 1/2 is 2/4. And I point that out because if this is 1/4 and this is 2/4, well then logically that would have to be 3/4, right? And then our last quarter comes back to 1 inch. That is really 4/4, even though you would never say that, and we would reduce it down to a whole number, 1. Okay, so 1/4 of an inch is smaller than a half an inch. Let's see if you can find the quarters of an inch on your scale.
All right, so here we are. Let's take a look. 1 inch, right? We were able to find the whole inches. And then we said the longest line between 0 and 1 was 1/2 of an inch, right there. Well, now the quarters are the longest line in between a whole number and the half. So the longest line between the 0 and the half is right here. There is 1/4 inch. Here is the same amount of space, right? 1/4, 2/4, that's our half. And that makes this one 3/4, followed by 4/4 or 1. So see if you can slide down the scale and find the quarters. If you go to 4, can you find 4 1/4? See, it would be the longest line in between the 4 and the 4 1/2. Can you find 4 3/4? Well, that would be the longest line in between 4 1/2 and 5. All right. So practice, you're looking again at the length of the lines. They're all the same length, all these long lines, and they show you whole inches, half inches, and 1/4 inches.
Now, in truth, a lot of people working with fractions, they can get about this far without too much difficulty. You know, in some ways, working with inches and fractions of an inch is like working with money. For example, think about 1 inch, think about $1. Now, if we were to take a dollar and break it into 2 pieces, well, that would be 50 cents, right? That would be half a dollar. See? Half. And then if we were to take 50 cents and break it into 2 pieces, well, 25-cent pieces, right? 2 of them, so 1/4. Same idea. Most people can handle fractions up to this point. Not too much of a struggle. Unfortunately, at our next step, things start getting a little bit more complicated. So, let's go to our giant inch again. We see quarters. Looking at the scale, we can find the quarters maybe, but the quarters are still very big measurements, right? So we need something a little bit finer. So let's fold it up to halves. Let's fold our giant inch into quarters, and then let's put one more fold in here. Let's open it up. And now all of a sudden we got a whole bunch of seams and creases to work with. Okay, now before you start drawing, I want you to do something a little bit different this time. The line you make, I don't want it to be as long as the other ones. Okay, so you're going to make me a nice dark line, just don't make it as long as all these other lines we've made so far. Okay, shorten it up. Maybe it's half as long, maybe it's 3/4 as long, but it should be easy to see that it's not the same length as those other lines. Alright, and when we're done, we've got a smaller fraction. Now, I don't want to get all math teachery on you, so we keep it nice and simple. There's a very simple way to figure out what the fraction is going to be for our next division down. And again, just to make this nice and simple, if you need to cut fractions in half, like 1/2 cut in half, 1/2 divided by 2, there's a proper way to do it that math teachers will teach you, and then there's the easy way to do it. And here's the easy way. Forget about the divide, just multiply the bottom times 2. See, 1/2 of 1/2 is 1/4, right? 2 times 2 is 4, the 1 just comes across. And we're going to do the same thing now to figure out what is 1/2 of a quarter. We'll get rid of the divide, we'll add and multiply. And we see 1 goes straight across, and it's actually 4 times 2. So the fraction we're going to work with now is 1/8 of an inch. So what we'll have here between the 0 and our first mark is 1/8 of an inch. Now look at the amount of space we're talking about here. Look at the amount of space we're talking about here. It's the same amount of space, isn't it? So we could say that 1/4 inch really is 2/8. Except we wouldn't really say it because we've reduced. But if you know that this is 1/8 and you know that this is 2/8, well, that helps you to figure out that this guy must be 3/8. Moving across, we know that 1/2 of an inch is 1, 2, 3, 4/8. Which means this one has to be 5/8. And then comes 3/4, which is actually 6/8, followed by 7/8, followed by 1, which is 8/8. Okay, so now what I want you to see is I want you to see a couple things. I want you to see that these lines are shorter than all the lines you've drawn so far. I also want you to see that there's a pattern here. 1, 3, 5, 7. So the numerator in all these fractions that we're going to be working with, it's always going to be an odd number. Now if it's an even number, 2/8, 4/8, 6/8, well that means you haven't reduced, and we need to reduce down. But the proper fraction will always have a odd number for its numerator. Alright, and we actually saw a little bit of that too back here with quarters, right? 1/4, 3/4, 2/4 got reduced down to 1/2. The fractions involved in reading a ruler are really simple once you get to work with them a little bit. 27/93rds. This is some crazy fraction that a math teacher who wants to torture you is going to throw at you. This is not really a fraction you're going to use in day-to-day life. People that program satellite trajectories work with fractions like this. The kind of fractions that we use when we're measuring things with technical drawing, they're the kind of fractions you need to bake cookies or to mix up a batch of pancakes, right? They're friendly fractions. They're nice fractions. They're not scary fractions. Alright, so our next trip is to find the eighths, okay? Pick up your scale and let's take a little look and let's see if we can find the 1/8 of an inch increments that run along the edge of it.